When you think about the fall of the Roman Republic, you probably picture the big cinematic
Oh,
moments.
absolutely. Caesar crossing the
Oh,
Rubicon.
right, exactly. Or the Ides of March, or, Mark Antony and Cleopatra. But today we are going back before all of that. We're going to the first crack in the foundation.
It really is the moment the debate stopped and the violence began. We are looking at the very first time political disagreement in Rome turned into open bloodshed in the Forum since, well, since the kings were kicked out centuries earlier.
And at the center of this huge storm is one guy, Tiberius Gracchus.
A name that still divides historians to this day.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We are taking Plutarch's biography of Tiberius Gracchus, specifically his life of Tiberius, and we are going to figure out how a man with the absolute perfect resume came to totally ruin the system. I mean, this guy was of noble birth, a war hero, he had ostensibly good intentions, and yet he sparked a revolution that eventually destroyed the very republic he was trying to save.
It is a tragedy in the classical sense. And having Plutarch as our primary source for this is really interesting because he isn't writing history in the modern sense. You won't find a dry list of dates and supply lines in his work.
He's more about the vibe of the person, right?
In a way, yes. He wrote parallel lives, where he pairs a famous Greek with a famous Roman to compare their moral character. His focus is on ethos. He actually writes in the introduction that a chance remark or a joke often reveals more about a man's character than a massive battle where thousands of people die.
Which I honestly prefer. It's those small details that tell you who someone actually is. So let's look at the character of Tiberius, because on paper, this guy is essentially Roman royalty.
He is the elite of the elite. His father, who was also named Tiberius, had been consul twice.
Which, for you listening, if you're not fully caught up on Roman civics, is basically being the president and the chief justice wrapped into one.
Pretty much. And he was a censor, which is even more prestigious.
Yeah.
But his mother, Cornelia, she is the real heavyweight here. She was the daughter of Scipio Africanus,
The general who defeated Hannibal.
the savior of Rome himself. So Tiberius is born into this massive legacy of saving the state. And Plutarch uses this really strange, almost supernatural anecdote about the father to show us the kind of immense pressure Tiberius grew up under.
Oh, the snake story. I read this part 3 times because I thought I was totally misinterpreting it.
It is definitely a bit jarring to the modern ear.
So the father finds 2 snakes on his bed, just chilling there.
Right, so he calls the augurs, the priests who read omens, and they give him this terrible choice. They tell him, if you kill the male snake, you, the husband, will die. But if you kill the female snake, Cornelia, your wife, will die.
Now, maybe this is just me being a 21st century person, but why couldn't he just, I don't know, shoo them both out the window? Why does one have to die?
That is just the Roman mindset. You do not ignore a sign from the gods, you have to engage with it. And the elder Tiberius doesn't hesitate, he kills the male snake.
He chooses death.
He reasons that Cornelia is young and she has children to raise, while he is near the end of his life. He kills the snake to save her, and he dies soon after.
That sets an impossibly high bar for the son, doesn't it? Like, your dad died to save the family. What have you done lately?
Precisely. It defines the family ethos, self-sacrifice for the greater good. And it left Cornelia to raise the children alone. She was an absolute powerhouse. Plutarch tells us she actually turned down a marriage proposal from King Ptolemy of Egypt.
Wait, she turned down being a queen?
She refused a crown to stay in Rome and raise her sons, Tiberius and his younger brother Gaius, and she didn't let them forget it either. There is a famous story where she scolds them, telling them that people in Rome still call her the mother-in-law of Scipio rather than the mother of the Gracchi.
She was basically asking, when are you two going to become famous enough that I'm known as your mom?
Huge pressure. People even said that whatever virtues the boys had, they owed them more to Cornelia's education than to their own nature. But even though they were brothers, Plutarch makes a really big point of contrasting their personalities.
Yeah, this felt like a classic odd couple setup to me. You have Tiberius, the older brother, gentle, composed, very proper. When he gave speeches, he stood completely still. He used a calm, conciliatory tone.
And then you have Gaius, the younger brother. He's the foil.
The firecracker. Plutarch says he was the first Roman to literally stride up and down the rostra, the speaking platform, and actually pull his toga off his shoulder while shouting.
He was electrifying, whereas Tiberius was persuasive.
My favorite detail in the whole text is about Gaius's temper. Plutarch mentions he was so explosive that he kept a slave named Licinius standing behind him with a pitch pipe.
A musical instrument.
Yes. If Gaius's voice got too harsh or angry during a speech, Licinius would play a soft note to remind him to calm down.
That's such a wonderful human detail. But it also sets the stage perfectly. Tiberius isn't the radical hothead. He's the calm, reasonable one, which makes what happens next even more shocking. Because before the politics, Tiberius actually has to prove himself as a soldier.
Right, because you can't be a politician in Rome without military service. So he serves in Africa under his brother-in-law, Scipio Aemilianus, and he's not leading from the back. Fannius, who was there, claims Tiberius was the first man over the wall against the enemy.
He had real physical courage. But the psychological turning point, the moment that really breaks his trust in the system, is the Numantine crisis in Spain.
Let's break this down. He's serving as a quaestor, which is basically a junior administrator.
Correct. He's serving under a general named Mancinus. And frankly, Mancinus is incompetent.
Okay.
The Roman army gets trapped by the Numantines. They are completely surrounded, desperate. They try to negotiate a truce, but the Numantines refuse to talk to Mancinus. They simply don't trust him.
But they trust Tiberius.
They remember his father's honor from years before, so they say, "We will only talk to the son of Gracchus." Tiberius steps up, negotiates the truce, and saves the lives of 20,000 Roman citizens.
20,000 men. You'd think he'd come home to a parade. Like, hey, I saved the entire army.
You would think that. But when he gets back to Rome, the Senate is furious. To them, a truce is a surrender. It's a stain on Roman honor. They actually debate stripping the general, Mancinus, naked and handing him back to the enemy in chains.
That seems so excessive.
It's brutal, and they wanted to blame Tiberius too. But the people, the families of those 20,000 soldiers, they swarmed to protect him. They saw him as a savior.
So this drives a wedge between him and the elites. He realizes the Senate cares about honor and prestige, but the people care about survival.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective leads us to the central conflict of the whole story, the Agrarian law. Because as Tiberius travels through Italy, specifically Etruria, he notices something terrifying.
The countryside is practically empty.
It's an economic and demographic crisis. Rich landowners had been buying up all the public land.
We need to clarify public land here because this is the crux of the argument. This isn't land the rich owned legally, right?
This is a crucial distinction. It was ager publicus, land won in wars that technically belonged to the Roman state. But the rich had been squatting on it for so long, treating it like their own private property, that they started to believe it actually was theirs. They pushed out the free small farmers, the regular Roman citizens, and replaced them with gangs of foreign slaves.
So you have the rich getting richer with cheap slave labor and the regular Roman guys losing their farms.
And here is why that matters so much for the state. In Rome at this time, you had to own land to serve in the military. If you don't have land, you can't be a soldier. So the army was shrinking. It wasn't just about poverty. It was a national security crisis.
Tiberius sees these deserted fields worked only by slaves and realizes the Roman middle class is being wiped out. And he wasn't the only one pushing for this reform, right?
No, he had teachers.
Yeah.
Philosophers like Bloodshed and Diophanes, telling him it was the moral thing to do. But Plutarch gives us a detail that I think proves this wasn't just Tiberius's ego talking. The graffiti.
The writing on the walls.
Everywhere Tiberius went, he saw messages written on porticos, walls, and monuments. The common people were begging him to recover the land for the poor. They were asking him to be their champion.
And he answers that call with one of the most famous speeches in history. I really have to read this part because the rhetoric is just devastating. He says, "The wild beasts that roam over Italy have their dens, but the men who fight and die for our country enjoy the common air and light and nothing else. They are called masters of the world, but they do not possess the single clod of earth."
It cuts right to the heart of the inequality. Masters of the world, but homeless.
So he proposes a law, and looking at the details in the source, it doesn't even seem that radical.
It wasn't. That's the tragedy of it. He wasn't confiscating private property. He was asking the rich to give back public land they were holding illegally. And he even offered to compensate them for it out of the public treasury.
But the rich lost their minds anyway.
They viewed it as robbery. They had built houses on that land. They buried their ancestors there. They felt it was theirs by custom, if not by strict law. And they hated Tiberius for siding with the mob as they saw it. They claimed he was trying to stir up a revolution to make himself a king.
So the Senate decides to stop him. But they don't do it by debating him on the merits. They use a constitutional loophole. They find another tribune, a guy named Marcus Octavius.
Now, we need to understand what a tribune is. It wasn't just a fancy title. The tribune of the plebs was a sacred office designed specifically to protect the poor. They had the power of the veto.
Which literally translates to I forbid.
Correct. A tribune could stop any law in its tracks. But the rich convinced Octavius, who was actually a decent man and a friend of Tiberius, to use his veto against Tiberius.
So you have one tribune of the people actively blocking another tribune of the people. It's a complete stalemate.
Tiberius tries to reason with him. Plutarch describes Tiberius grabbing Octavius's hand in front of the crowd, crying, begging him not to block the will of the people.
But Octavius refuses. He's too afraid of the rich faction. So Tiberius takes the gloves off. He completely freezes the government. He puts his own seal on the Temple of Saturn, the Treasury, so no money can move in or out. He grinds the entire Roman state to a halt.
It's a massive game of chicken. And nobody blinks. So Tiberius does something completely unprecedented.
He crosses the line. He proposes a vote to fire Octavius.
Which begs the question, can he actually do that?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Technically, there was no law for it, but Tiberius makes this fascinating philosophical argument to the crowd. He says a tribune is sacred because he protects the people. But if he destroys the people's rights, he isn't a tribune anymore.
He compares it to a Vestal Virgin.
Yes. He says a Vestal Virgin is sacred, but if she breaks her vows, she loses her sanctity and can be buried alive. He argues Octavius has broken his vow to the people, so he has stripped himself of the office.
The people buy the argument. They vote Octavius out. He gets dragged off the rostra. The mob attacks him, and his faithful slave actually loses an eye trying to protect him.
And this is the moment the Republic really breaks. Tiberius passed his law, yes, but he showed that if an institution stands in your way, you can just mobilize the mob to crush it. He prioritized the will of the people over the constitutional process.
And once you break those unwritten rules, everyone gets paranoid. The rich are now absolutely convinced Tiberius is a tyrant in the making.
And then a massive coincidence happens. King Attalus of Pergamum dies and leaves his entire kingdom and wealth to the Roman people in his will.
Talk about a windfall.
Yeah.
And Tiberius jumps right on it. He says, great, we'll use that new money to fund the new farmers. He completely bypasses the Senate.
That was the final straw for them. Foreign affairs and finance were the Senate's absolute domain. Now Tiberius is acting like a one-man government. A senator named Pompeius even stands up and claims he saw Tiberius wearing a royal diadem and a purple robe in his house.
Which is basically an accusation of treason. He wants to be king. And in Rome, you can kill a man for wanting to be king.
Tiberius knows he's in the crosshairs. His term as tribune is ending. Once he's out of office, he loses his legal immunity. The Senate will prosecute him, maybe even execute him. So he decides to run for re-election.
Which, again, was totally against custom. You weren't supposed to hold the office back to back. It looked like he was trying to hold on to power indefinitely.
The day of the election comes, and the vibes are terrible. Plutarch loves his omens, and he really piles them on here.
Oh, the omens are like a horror movie setup.
The sacred chickens refuse to eat.
Which, for you listening, might sound ridiculous to us today, but was a standard Roman way of checking if the gods approved. If the chickens don't eat, the army doesn't march and the politician doesn't act.
Exactly. Then Tiberius stubs his toe so hard coming out of his house that the nail splits, and he bleeds right through his sandal.
And then the crows, fighting on a roof, dislodging a stone that falls right at his feet.
Any superstitious Roman, which was basically all of them, would have just went back to bed. But he has this philosopher friend, Blasius, who shames him. He says, "What will people say if the son of Gracchus is scared of a raven? What if the people are waiting for you?" So he goes to the Capitol anyway.
And it is total chaos. A riot is brewing. Tiberius is in the middle of the crowd. He can't make himself heard over the noise. He gets word that the rich are actively plotting to kill him right there.
So he signals to his supporters. He touches his hand to his head.
Meaning, my head is at risk. My life is in danger.
But his enemies see it from a distance and run to the Senate, screaming he's touching his head, he's demanding the crown.
It is the excuse they needed. Now, the consul refuses to use violence, to his credit. He says he won't kill a citizen without a trial. But Scipio Nasica, the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, decides he's had enough. He shouts, "Since the consul betrays the state, let those who wish to save the laws follow me."
And he leads a mob of senators out of the temple. And this image is just, it sticks with you. These are the most dignified men in Rome. They wrap their togas around their arms like shields, but they don't have actual weapons.
No swords at all.
No swords, because bringing a weapon into the assembly was deeply taboo. This wasn't a military coup, it was a brawl. They break up the wooden benches, they grab table legs and fragments of wood. It is an improvised, brutal lynch mob made up of the quote-unquote fathers of the state.
They charge into the crowd. The people are so intimidated by seeing the senators that they actually give way. Tiberius tries to run, but he trips over a body, and they beat him to death with pieces of wood.
The first blood. Plutarch says over 300 of his supporters were killed that day. Not by foreign enemies, but by their own countrymen.
And they didn't even let them have a proper burial. They threw the bodies into the river. Tiberius Gracchus, the war hero, the son of Cornelia, floating in the Tiber.
It was a profound shock to the system that Rome never truly recovered from.
So, when you look back at this, was it inevitable? We started by saying this was the unraveling of the Republic.
It was the precedent that destroyed them. Tiberius showed that you could use the mob to bypass the Senate. But the Senate showed that you could use violence to solve a political problem. Once you introduce violence into politics, you cannot put it back in the bottle.
And nobody really won, did they?
Not really. Scipio Nasica, the man who led the mob, became so intensely hated by the people that the Senate had to ship him overseas just to keep him safe. He died wandering in disgrace in Asia.
And what about the philosopher, Blasius, the guy who told him to ignore the ravens?
That is perhaps the most chilling part of the whole text. He was interrogated later about his role in the faction. He admitted he was so loyal to Tiberius that he would have done anything he asked. When the interrogators asked, "What if he ordered you to burn down the Capitol?" Blasius said Tiberius never would have ordered that. But when they pressed him on it, he finally said, if he had ordered it, it would have been right for me to do it. He then fled and eventually committed suicide.
That is blind loyalty. That is dangerous.
That is the danger of philotimia, that love of honor and ambition that Plutarch warns us about in his Ethos. It completely blinds you to the greater good.
It's such a heavy story. It makes you wonder, if Tiberius had just backed down, would the Republic have survived? Or was the system already too broken to fix because of that massive gap between the rich and the poor?
That is exactly the question Plutarch leaves us wrestling with. Was Tiberius a genuine hero who tried to save the poor? Or a demagogue who broke the law and invited chaos?
I want to leave you with a thought today. We often cheer for the maverick breaking the rules to do the right thing. But if a political system cannot correct injustice through laws because of massive obstruction, is breaking the constitutional rules justified? And once you break them, do you ultimately destroy the very thing you're trying to save?
History suggests you might.
That's it for this deep dive into Tiberius Gracchus. Thanks for listening.